Canada is the 6th most developed country in the world, according to the UN's Human Development Index. If First Nations were being measured using the same data, they would be 63rd, lower than Russia and Libya. First Nations are about 61% of Canada's Aboriginal population, which includes Inuit and Métis. That's just over 900,000 people. 60% of First Nations live off-reserve in cities and towns across Canada. The remaining 360,000 live on reserve. There are more than 2,300 reserves whose populations range from a couple hundred people to more than 10,000. First Nations communities face multiple crises. When it comes to education, First Nations people have a significantly higher dropout rate than other Canadians. 6 out of 10 First Nations living on reserve were high school dropouts. 3 out of 10 were dropouts for First Nations living off reserve. Compare that to 1 out of 10 for other Canadians. On reserve, more than half of First Nations need a new school, while over 70% of the schools need major repairs. Another startling statistic, a First Nation youth living on reserve is more likely to end up in jail than to graduate high school. Now let's take a look at income. Based on data from the 2006 census, 50% of Status First Nations children lived in poverty, compared to 17% for other Canadian kids. The median income for a First Nations person was a little over $19,000, compared to over $33,000 for other Canadians. Finally, health. The average life expectancy for First Nations men is 69 years, 9 years less than average for other Canadians. First Nations women live 77 years, or 5 years less than average. The infant mortality rate for First Nations is 1.5 times higher than for average Canadians. Compared to Canadian youth, the suicide rate is 5 to 6 times higher among First Nations youth. When it comes to diabetes, First Nations people aged 45 and over had nearly twice the rate compared with other Canadians. How can we narrow this deep divide between First Nations and Canadians? We've asked a variety of people to offer their best single idea. To read them, visit our series, Rich Country, Poor Nations.